have an honest question. Have you ever just craved violence? Have you ever just wanted to play a deck that allows you to swarm the board with all kinds of meaningless drivel that will eventually make your opponents wonder why your turn hasn't ended yet, and you tell them that's because all of them are already dead? They're just watching you kill them. Well, if you ever wanted to build a deck like that, then Necrobloom is here for you, and I know we already did a $15 video on this deck, but this is a full power concoction, and it's a bit of a doozy. The core strategy of the Necrobloom has everything to do with the effect written on the card, which is a bonkers pair of effects we have access to. First of all, it has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, create a 0/1 green plant creature token. If we control 7 or more lands with different names, instead make a 2/2 black zombie creature token. And lands in our graveyard get Dredge 2. Now, if you asked yourself, hey, that effect looks really familiar, I kind of remember that on Field of the Dead, then you'd be right, because the commander is just Field of the Dead in the command zone. Necrobloom is a wondrously powerful commander because one of the strongest lands in Magic the Gathering is something we get to just cast out of this zone, and we get to double it up with our Field of the Dead as well, which we'll get to when we talk about the mana base of the deck. But what are we planning on doing? Well, we are going to be building a landfall aristocrat strategy, leaning heavier into the aristocrats because in these colors, most of our ways to kill people are going to be from that side of the fence. So how are we going to make our opponents die from summoning all these black zombie creature tokens? Well, looking at the Aristocrats package first will give us a bit of an idea of where we are at. Ayara First of Lochthwain will burn our opponents for 1 every time one of our zombies touches the board. We can also sack those Field of the Dead zombies to draw cards. Bastion of Remembrance will burn our opponents and give us life every time one of our cards touches the graveyard, one of our tokens. Cruel Celebrant will do the exact same thing, as will Zulaport Cutthroat. Then there's Mirkwood Bats, which will burn our opponents every single time we sacrifice a token or create a token. And finally, Dina Soul Steeper, who has my heart, who has the ability to burn our opponents every single time we gain life. She also has a sack outlet attached to her, which is enough to destroy most board states. Just give a bunch of tokens to her and then have people lose cards to things like Butcher of Malakir while they burn just for every single token that we lose from our other aristocrats. She can decimate an entire play table on her own, and she can decimate me in several ways. Honestly, I'm going to go ahead and give you guys just a fair warning. This entire deck is chock full of ridiculously hot Magic the Gathering women, and I am not going to apologize for how I plan to act throughout the rest of this video. But let's go ahead and quickly move into the token section of the deck, because our commander makes tokens and we want to create even more tokens because that is what our deck is aiming to do. Make tons of these things and then sacrifice them. First of all, Ocelot Pride. At the beginning of our end step, we make a 1/1 white cat creature token if we have gained life. Then if we have the city's blessing, a really easy thing to do, honestly, then we will generate a token copy of every single creature that entered our battlefield this turn as a token. So all the Field of the Dead zombie tokens we've made, we get to create more of those. Then we have Kambal Profiteering Mayor, who will create more token copies of anything that we make at least once per turn. And anytime a token touches the battlefield, all of our opponents will burn for 1 and we will gain 1. Baron Bertram Greywater can sacrifice our tokens to draw us a card, and he also generates a 1/1 black vampire rogue anytime one token is created on our board, only once per turn. Beledros Witherbloom lets us pay life to untap all of our lands, of which we will have plenty, and at the beginning of every upkeep we get to make a 1/1 black and green pest creature token that can gain us life when it's sacrificed. And Shatterfang will supplement all of our token creation by creating squirrels on top of all the tokens that we make. Should be noted that if we have something like Beledros Weatherbloom on the battlefield and say Kambal or Baron, then Chatterfang will be able to act as a pseudo doubling season for all of our tokens. Beledros makes a token, Chatterfang makes a squirrel. Baron Greywater sees the Beledros token, he makes a vampire. Chatterfang sees that, he makes a squirrel. If Kambal is on the board as well making a token, Chatterfang sees that and makes another squirrel. If Ocelot Pride is about to double up all of our tokens, then Chatterfang will give us another instance of that by making squirrels for all the tokens that Ocelot Pride makes. Honestly, Chatterfang's ridiculous. He also has the ability to sacrifice the squirrels that he makes to give any creature plus X negative X, so he can be a removal spell if he needs to be, but primarily he's in here so that we can get tons of tokens, and sometimes sacrificing all of our things at once will give us massive benefits. But we have more sacrificing to go. We also have 5 dedicated sack outlets in this deck, beginning with Warren Soul Trader, who can sacrifice creatures to create treasure tokens. Paying the life is a super easy cost to pay for that. Also, man, this card makes me very confused for lots of reasons. Then we have Tarian's Journal. We can sack any artifact creature we have to draw a card at sorcery speed, or we can discard our hand to flip it into the Tomb of Aclazotz, and this tomb can let us cast creatures from our graveyard with finality counters. Honestly, Tarian's Journal has been a favorite of mine in most of the decks I've been able to include it in since it came out. Priest of the Forgotten Gods can sacrifice 2 of our creatures to make everybody sack a creature with us and lose 2 life, and then we draw a card, and then we gain black mana. Jesus Christ, this card is stacked. I adore Priest of the Forgotten Gods. Then we have Braids, another character I need to make a $15 deck on because Jesus Christ. She's one of my favorite characters in Magic the Gathering's lore, introducing herself in the newer instances of Dominaria during the Phyrexian invasion with the iconic line, "I can help you kill that dragon, but first you have to help me kill me." I adore Braids. Anyway, at the beginning of our end step, we can sacrifice any type of permanent on our board, and then our opponents are given a choice. Ride the Braids train and sacrifice the same permanent, or lose 2 life and we draw a card, depending on what permanent it is. So we can sack a land really easily in this deck, and our opponents usually will not sack one with us, meaning we get to draw 3 and burn everybody for 2 oftentimes. And if people are ahead enough on lands but only have their commanders on the board, sack a creature that we make with our commander itself, and nobody wants to be on the Braids train with us then. Then we have Altar of Ashnod, or Ashnod's Altar. I really wish Ashnod could have made it in this deck as well, because personal reasons. Ashnod's Altar can sacrifice a creature to give us 2 colorless mana, letting us have super extended turns when we need to have them. Honestly, the only thing that's missing in this deck right now is a Phyrexian Altar, but I could not find a spot that I specifically wanted to put it in. Though if you want to put Phyrexian Altar in instead of Ashnod's Altar, that is entirely on you. I have personal reasons for choosing this one. Anyway, we're not done yet. We also have to make use of that dredge ability our commander has. And one of the ways we're going to do that is by reanimating things in our graveyard. Now, we want to have ways to reanimate lands as well as creatures. So let's begin with one of my personal favorites, Altar of Baal. For 2 mana, we drop this on the board, and for 3 mana thereafter, we can tap it and exile any of the tokens we have on the board to reanimate a single creature at sorcery speed. It's slow, steady, fair reanimation, and damn near nobody sees it coming. Then we have Balaged Recovery, which can be a land if we need it to, and it can return any card from our graveyard to our hand. Conduit of Worlds lets us play lands from our graveyard, and also if we're in a pinch, we can tap it to play any spell that's a permanent type in our graveyard onto the battlefield, with the stipulation that it's the only spell we get to play that turn. But that's honestly fine, because sometimes we want to play one spell on our turn and then lots of spells on our opponent's turns. Then we have Dread Return. This lets us return any creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield, or we can sacrifice 3 creatures to flash it back from our graveyard. Journey to Eternity can give us access to a Kaya's Ghost form effect, letting a creature that dies automatically reanimate, and then of course we can flip it into Atsal, Cave of Eternity. This gives us access to repeatable reanimation while also being a landfall trigger for our commander, and it's a uniquely named land, so it's that much easier easier to generate the zombie tokens. Then we have Emeria Shepherd. Whenever a land touches the battlefield, we can take a non-land permanent from our graveyard and put it into our hand. But if we drop a plains on the battlefield, we just reanimate the card. And, boy howdy, we have ways of abusing that. Malakir Rebirth is a feign death we can use on any creature if it's about to die, and honestly, it's gonna be a Malakir Mire half the time anyway, so make use of the fact that it's another uniquely named land in the deck. Redemption Choir and Sun Titan are effectively the same card. They can reanimate any permanent in our grave with mana value 3 or less, and that includes lands. Never forget these cards get lands in this deck. If we find lands in our graveyard with Dredge, Sun Titan and Redemption Choir can drop those on the board, automatically triggering our commander and giving us access to more tokens. And then we have Lurrus of the Dream Den, which lets us cast any permanent in our graveyard that has a mana value of 2 or less. I would not want to try to build this deck as a companion deck with Lurrus as the companion. I think Lurrus is probably going to be best used as either 99 of this deck or the star of his own deck. Spoiler alert, there is a Lurrus of the Dream Den deck coming for those of you who want to see the Broken Cat from Modern in action. Then we have Eerie Ultimatum as a top-end win con. Return any number of permanent cards with different names from our graveyard to the battlefield. This is Commander. That is all of them. If you cast this card and nobody stops it, you probably win the game. Dredging with our Commander and getting a full graveyard and then just casting this thing and putting all of our Aristocrats and token generators and even extra lands that have been milled all onto the battlefield, we will win. Simply put, if this gets cast, we win the game. And oh, it's got a secondary buddy in Lich King's Conquest, or Lich Knight's Conquest. You can sacrifice any number of tokens we have and return that many creature cards from the graveyard to the battlefield. This thing is only 45 cents, and it is broken busted. And in any Aristocrat-style deck, this can serve as a win con in and of itself. The thing is fantastic. Getting effectively your entire graveyard onto the battlefield is nutters busted, but we got to talk about how we're going to draw through our deck, and we will be drawing a lot of cards. So, from experience, this deck can dig through itself very, very quickly. Like, unreasonably fast. So I'm just going to give you a warning. There is a single card that I've chosen not to include in this version of the deck list, but if you so choose, you can put it in. And that card is Gitrog Monster. Gitrog Monster effectively goes infinite with the commander if you have luck with your lands. So, I'm just dropping that now. I know some of you are going to want to have that card in the deck, and I appreciate your enthusiasm. I have chosen not to include him in this list, but he may or may not survive in the 99 of my physical deck. We'll see. But let's go ahead and go to the actual draw cards we will be playing, beginning with Mentor of the Meek. Anytime another creature with power 2 or less touches the battlefield, we get to pay 1 mana to draw a card. This means if we drop a land on our battlefield and generate a token with our commander, we can just tap that land immediately for a draw. Mentor of the Meek is fantastic in this deck, and the mana you spend on him is certainly worthwhile. Sylvan Library is also cute because even though it's a bit cost ineffective, I'm not the biggest fan of the card usually, but in our deck, we don't care about the life loss so much, and with Sylvan Library, we can draw the additional cards and then just replace the draws with Dredge, digging really far into our deck and then discarding any of the lands that we draw back into our graveyard, giving us really easy access to milling so that we have a graveyard full of reanimation targets. Then we have Skull Clamp. Equip it to a creature. If that creature dies, draw 2 cards. Albeit, this card is stronger when our commander isn't online fully because it'll auto-kill any of the green plant tokens that our commander makes, and it's going to be harder to use this card once our commander is fully online, but honestly, it works well enough in both situations. Morbid Opportunist will draw us a card anytime a creature dies, but only once per turn. Death Reap Ritual does the same thing, but only at the beginning of our end step. Moldervine Reclamation will draw us a card and give us a life every single time a creature dies. The card is bonkers nutty in this deck, and it will do more work than you know. Then we have Greed. Oh god, we have Greed. We use Greed so that we can pay 2 life and draw a card. But in our deck, that can basically just say, pay 2 life, Dredge 2, over and over and over and over again, filling up our graveyard. Let's say that you have, oh, I don't know, that previously mentioned Eerie Ultimatum in your hand, and the only thing we're missing is a graveyard big enough to kill our opponents. Well, Greed is here for you. This is doing all the work that Gitrog Monster would be doing at a bit higher of a cost for us. Swap it out for Gitrog Monster if you want the deck to go into turbo mode. Then we have Matsalanti the Great Door. This can draw us a card and discard as a card, putting a reanimate target in the graveyard, but the main reason it's here is to be able to transform it into the core. This already goes bonkers with Greed. So the core says it's a land, of course, it's uniquely named for our commander, but add X mana of any one color, where X is the number of permanents in our graveyard. So when it's done drawing us cards in our deck, we flip it, getting a trigger of our commander, and then when we tap it, for any reason, we can send all that mana into something like Greed to dredge through so much of our deck to create a massive mana turn later on. In earlier builds of the deck, I was running an Exsanguinate and a Debt to the Deathless as ways to close out the game. I later realized that was completely unnecessary, but if you want the flavorful nuke win, then Matsalanti will create that scenario for you. Dark Prophecy gives us the ability to draw a card and lose a life anytime one of our creatures dies, which they will do a lot, and Bolas's Citadel is effectively a win con in and of itself. We can look at the top card of our library at any time and play lands and cast spells from the top of that library. The card is very affordably priced at $3.75, so even if you're playing on a somewhat budget version of Necrobloom, you still can include Bolas's Citadel. Also, Necrobloom gets to avoid one of the problems that Bolas's Citadel often runs into. Citadel, it has a weakness of hitting lands off the top of the deck and then being unable to dig us further into the deck. But in our deck, we have some easy peasy ways of playing additional lands, meaning we can just keep on playing lands off the top of our deck and dig further into our deck with Bolas's Citadel. Honestly, card is a house in any deck you put it in, but in this deck especially, we get to circumvent one of the biggest side effects the deck normally has. And we can sacrifice 10 non-land permanents to make each opponent lose 10 life with it. Gee, I wonder if our commander is going to be generating a lot of non-land permanents that are all very expendable. Then we have Dread Presence. Whenever a swamp touches our battlefield, we can either deal 2 damage to any target and gain 2 life. Ooh, life gain to make up for the greed. And we can also draw a card and lose 1 life if we choose to do that instead. A draw engine that also can kill things on the board whenever a swamp touches the battlefield? Man, I wonder how many swamps our deck is running. Guess we'll find out. But first, interaction. I'm going to go ahead and give you a warning. I've already mentioned the deck is nasty, but the removal package of the deck is going to be seen as quite mean. But I'm going to be honest, you'll be fine. When you see the things that I've chosen to put in here, you might ask yourself if I'm crazy or if I'm an asshole. And the answer to both of those is yes. I've played the deck a couple times at my LGS, and I've handed the deck to other people to play, and the unanimous decision has been, this feels like I'm always in the driver's seat. So let's take a look at what we are running with a 12-card removal and interaction package, beginning with Abstruse Appropriation. I picked this art because the idea of a Zendikari angel being infected with Kozilek's particular brand of Eldraziing is great. I like the bismuth motif more than the tentacle motif sometimes because it's just really cool. So, hey, run with it. Also, she's just really fucking pretty. Anyway, this lets us exile any non-land permanent, and then we can cast any card from the cards that have been exiled with Abstruse Appropriation. And we can spend colorless mana as though it is any color mana at all to use that card. We do have a couple of lands that can produce colorless mana, and they will be very useful when we use Abstruse Appropriation. Accursed Marauder is a super recurable version of Fleshbag Marauder, and it avoids the token problem that Fleshbag Marauder usually runs into. Accursed Marauder also, the reason it's recurable is we have cards like Lurrus of the Dream Den, which can let us cast any 2 mana or lower permanent from our grave. Like this one. Assassin's Trophy can blow up any non-land permanent and then give somebody a land. Beast Within can blow up any permanent at all and give somebody a beast token. Fel the Profane can blow up any creature or planeswalker while being a uniquely named land on the back side. Teysa Orzhov Scion, you know, I basically put her in here because I think she is absolutely gorgeous, but let's be honest, sacrificing 3 white creatures to exile a creature is also good, because whenever one of our black creatures dies, we get to make a white spirit creature. Our commander makes nothing but black creature tokens, so Teysa gets to turn all of our dying black creature tokens into, well, more creature tokens and can use them to destroy anything. She basically doubles up all of our token production as long as it's the ones that came from our commander, while also giving us access to removal attached to them. She is a fantastic card, and I love the anime artwork for her. I'm glad that we at least got one more Teysa before she finally got written out of the Magic story that has the original Orzhov boob window. Then we have the Witch Enchanter that can blow up any artifact or enchantment when it touches the board, and of course, it's an MDFC, so we can just play it as a land if we need. Uniquely named as well, because all MDFCs are, and our commander cares about that greatly. Then we have Rise of the Witch King, which can sacrifice a creature on everybody's board, and then we get to reanimate any permanent at all from our graveyard if we sacked one as well. We usually will be the one that sacks one too, because we always have zombie tokens. Then we have Binding of the Old Gods, which can blow up any non-land permanent an opponent controls, and then you can search your library for a forest card and put it on the battlefield once the next turn comes around. You can also use it as a win con, effectively, because giving all of your zombies Death Touch on the last part of the saga and then swinging with them instead of using them for normal Aristocrat stuff is a funny and mean way to win a game, but that's not the meanest thing we have here. We also have Butcher of Malik here, a reanimatable grave pact that makes everybody sacrifice a creature when it or another creature we have dies. Then we have Savra, Queen of the Golgari. All of you who've been here long enough know exactly how I feel about this woman, and I will not explain myself, nor will I try to justify any actions I may or may not take when I'm done recording this video. Savra, Queen of the Golgari, can let us make everybody sacrifice a creature alongside us if we have a black creature get sacrificed. If it's a green creature, we can gain 2 life. This gives it wonderful synergy with things like Chatterfang. And, of course, if we have to sacrifice herself to anything, she counts for her own abilities as well. And finally, we just have Grave Pact. Like, it's just Grave Pact. Anytime one of our creatures dies, everybody else sacrifices a creature alongside us. I could have fit a Dictate of Erebos in here as well if I was feeling extra spicy, but I was not. I wanted to give just a little bit of mercy, the tiny bit the deck is willing to give people. But we are not done yet. We also have 3 board wipes to talk about, one of which is Undo Inversion. This lets us blow up any non-land permanent. And by any, I mean all of them. This can reset combo players' boards to hell and high water, and we will always be able to rebuild easily because we are a landfall graveyard-centered aristocrat deck. What do we care if our permanents touch the graveyard? That's where the hell we want them. This can also be Undo Sky Ruins on the backside if we desperately need it to be. Again, MDFCs are uniquely named for our commander. Then we have Pernicious Deed, which can also blow up every artifact, creature, or enchantment with converted mana cost X or less, where X is what we pay into it after it's on the board. I adore Pernicious Deed for a couple of reasons. So, think about this. This is a board wipe that we can reanimate with a Redemption Choir or a Sun Titan. We can spend a ton of money into Pernicious Deed, blow up all of the stuff on the board, including ours, obviously, and then summon a Sun Titan and then get this right back and stare at our opponents and say, I will do it again if any of you put anything on the board that I do not like. Just, the card is fantastically strong. Then we have Toxic Deluge. As an additional cost to cast this, pay X life. All creatures get -X until end of turn. And holy crap, with this most recent reprinting, this card is finally in budget range for people. I hated when this was like a $20 or $30 card, because if I wanted to put it in a deck, I couldn't afford it. Why do you think I built $15 decks in the first place? I was not able to afford these things for a long-ass time. But now at $3, while they can't be fit into one of my hyper budget decks, they can be fit into a lot of players' mana bases now, or not mana bases, deck bases. What am I talking about? But yeah, no, the card's affordable now. It's a great board wipe. It gets around things like Indestructible. Play it if you haven't already. But now we got to talk about probably the most important part of the deck, getting lands onto the battlefield. Let us begin with a 12-card Rant Package before we get into the actual mana that we are going to be using. But every one of these cards is an all-star in its own right. Azusa, Lost But Seeking, and I did want to have this artwork specifically. I think she's prettier in this one than the most used one. Anyway, Azusa gives us access to 2 additional lands each turn, which, like I said before, gives us wonderful ways to abuse Bolas's Citadel. Cultivate gets us 2 basic lands from the deck, and then we can drop 1 on the battlefield. Dryad of the Elysian Grove gives us an additional land on each of our turns, and lands we control are every basic land type in addition to their other types. That means Dread Presence is giving us tons of swamp benefits, and Emeria Shepherd is giving us tons of benefits for having plains, because all of our lands, every single one of them, are also plains and swamps. These are important things to remember. Then we have Farseek. Search your library for a non-forest, drop it on the board. Sakura Tribe Elder. Search your library for a basic land, drop it on the board. Nature's Lore. Search your library for a forest, drop it on the board. 3 visits, same thing. Undergrowth Recon. Every single upkeep we can return a land from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. A land we've probably thrown there by dredging. White of the Reliquary is a new all-star in decks like this. She lets us sacrifice a creature to ramp by putting any land, any land at all onto the battlefield. This means we can get things like Field of the Dead or Urborg onto the battlefield really early so that we get mass benefits from things like Dread Presence. This thing's great. And I tried to include Knight of the Reliquary as well, but I wasn't able to fit her in, unfortunately. And then we have the new Flare of Cultivation. We can sacrifice a green creature, like the thing our commander can produce, to play this card for free. Otherwise, it's just a Cultivate. It's great. Thalia and the Gitrog Monster, because I am weak to Paladin women. And Thalia riding the Gitrog Monster it's a wonderful, wonderful motif. But it's got First Strike and Death Touch, and we can play an additional land on each of our turns. Creatures and non-basic lands our opponents control drop onto the battlefield tapped, and with this card, anytime it attacks, we can sacrifice a creature or land to draw a card, giving us easy access to land throwing into the graveyard, easy access to draw, and another sack outlet we have access to. And finally, we have Growing Rights of Itlimoc. This card can get us a creature from the top of our deck, top 4 cards, mind, and it's only one from the top 4. It's fine. This is not the reason you play this card. This is the reason you play this card. Gaia's Cradle for, like, what, $3, basically? This lets us have green mana for every creature we control. All the creatures we've been spamming out with our token generations. The turns I've had with Itlimoc on the board are some of the nuttiest things possible. And again, I hate to keep saying it, but it is a uniquely named land when it touches the board like that. You know, the whole reason you use this is because it flips here. You could whiff on that grabbing a creature thing that it does, and it doesn't matter because you're just gonna auto turn it into this and then start having a nutty turn when the next turn comes around. Also, it's a 3 mana permanent, which means it comes back on the board from Redemption Choir. It comes back on the board with our Sun Titan. It comes back on the board when we cast Eerie Ultimatum. It's got ways of coming back. Super simple and easy ways to make it come back. But this is a deck that uniquely has to have a very complex mana base to work. Obviously, it is a landfall style deck, so we are running more basics than I normally would in a deck like this. 4 of each to be exact, and even then, sometimes I feel like this isn't quite enough. Then we've got 7 fetching lands here. Of course, we've got the fetch lands in our commander's color identities, Marsh Flats, Windswept Heath, and Verdant Catacombs. But I've also added in a Misty Rainforest and an Arid Mesa so that we have access to other land fetchers as well. Frozen Verge is an all-star here too because it not only land fetches, but it also ramps for us. And Deceptive Landscape is one of the only ways I plan on destroying what this deck is trying to do. So I deliberately did not put in that many cycle lands, because with this deck, you can cycle a land, and then instead of drawing a card like cycle says you can, we can just choose to dredge. And because the land is technically in the graveyard when we choose to dredge with our commander, instead of getting one of the lands in our grave, we just get the land we threw in there. So we can pay 3 mana, cycle the Deceptive Landscape, letting us mill 2 cards, and then we just put the Deceptive Landscape back in our hands. Any turn that we have excess mana that we do not need to do anything with, we just repeatedly cycle the Deceptive Landscape over and over and over again to dig down into our deck. Otherwise, it's just a really good fetching land that every tricolor deck has access to. Now, I chose not to use stuff like Tranquil Thicket because, I'm going to be honest, if you use something like Growing Rites of Itlimoc to give yourself, say, 20 green mana and Tranquil Thicket, you just mill 40 cards out of your deck instantaneously without even thinking. I didn't want my deck to do that. I like my decks being strong, I don't like them being overpowered, and the deck already feels strong enough as is. Then we've got 3 Omni lands. We have Command Tower, gives us Mana of Our Color's Identity. Then we have Indatha Triome, perfectly searchable with all of our land fetch, and Murmuring Bosk is a Triome that is searchable with our forest fetching. I'm really happy when I play Abzan because it means I get a copy of this. Then we have a copy of each Shockland, of course, since they are searchable, and a copy of every single Surveil land, since they are also searchable. They come into the battlefield tapped, and they let us surveil, giving us more ways to fill our graveyard. Then we have the utility lands of the deck, beginning with Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. Urborg says that every land we have is a swamp in addition to its other types, so even during turns where we don't have things like Dryad of the Elysian Grove, we can use this to abuse things like Dread Presence. And then we have its brother Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, making all of our lands forest, which can make it much easier to smooth out turns by having perfect mana fixing. Bojuka Bog gives us recurable, in this deck at least, ways of getting rid of people's graveyards. Golgari Rot Farm is an important piece of utility because a lot of our lands in the deck are MDFCs, and we want to be able to play the MDFCs as lands without feeling like we're losing them. Drop Golgari Rot Farm on the board, throw an MDFC from your land side back into your hand, and now it's a usable spell. And if you need to reuse an MDFC again, then just sack the Golgari Rot Farm and put it back in your hand, and then we can keep putting those cards back into our hand for casting. Because it's so easy for us to abuse lands, sacrificing them, putting them back into our hand, etc. You don't need to use more than one of these bounce lands. One is plenty for this effect to work. And then we have Field of the Dead. This card is what the deck is built on. It is the foundation that makes this deck work, because our commander is just this card. Anytime a creature touches our battle, or anytime a land touches our battlefield, we spawn a 2/2 black zombie creature token. If this is on the board with our commander, that's 2 tokens every single time. And if it's on the board with our commander and Shatterfang and Ocelot Pride, man, I really don't want to know how you lose a game when all those things are on the battlefield together. It's so hard to think of a losing scenario when all of that is stacked up for you. But that is all for the mana base. In conclusion, as I've said to death, this is a ridiculously powerful commander. Field of the Dead is one of the strongest lands in Magic the Gathering, and stapling that and that bonkers-ass dredge effect to a commander in Abzan colors, where we get access to more than one Triome that's fetchable, Jesus, this thing's insane. And, of course, we get access to all the best Aristocrats, we get access to all the best sack outlets, we get access to all the best landfall triggers. Like, everything is stacked in this deck's favor. It is a disgustingly powerful brew, and it's one of the only reasons I took apart Dina Soul Steeper, and that was literally because I had pieces in Dina that were expensive, and I did not want them to leave Dina. So I put my Halofoil Dina and my Grave Pact and all my other expensive pieces and shoved them into Necrobloom, which is why I want Necrobloom to have a bunch of pretty women in it. That's the real reason, because the pretty women were all in the Dina deck to begin with. But That all said, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already, and just have a blast with this deck. It is a ridiculous, cantankerous fun. Insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability a Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here. They would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitt, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.